Well, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you all had a good lunch. Apologies to those joining online. We were all having some really nice conversations, so we're a little bit delayed coming back. We hope you had a good lunch at home too and enjoyed, if you got your conference pack in time, some tea, coffee, hot chocolate, and a chocolate bar as well inside your conference packs. So we are now being joined by Emma from UCCF, who heads up the Science Leadership Network. She's going to tell us a little bit more about public engagement, but particularly with the work with students. So over to Emma.
Okay, amazing. Thanks so much, Steph. Yeah, nice to be with you all. Thanks for having me. I enjoyed lunch very much, so I hope you did too. So as Steph said, here we go. Let's go back one. There we go. I'm here representing UCCF. Which stands for the Universities and Colleges Christian Fellowship. And I imagine lots of you guys will know us like from your own time at uni already. So give me a wave if you were involved in a Christian union at university. Yeah, that's lots of us, amazing. It's always lovely to meet alumni of CUs. So if we haven't already chatted about what your CU experience was like, I would love to hear more. So if those of you who maybe don't know quite so much about what we get up to, the UCCF are all about making disciples of Jesus in the student world. And we do that through Christian unions, which are student-led societies, with the goal who are going out on their campuses to try and reach the 2.5 million undergraduates in the UK with the gospel. I've got a fun little slide with some pictures of the kind of things we get up to. You can see some students out doing some first contact evangelism on campus, Uncover, which are our gospel projects that we give out to people to read. Yeah, some students meeting together, putting on events for their friends, sending out these like fun little freshers packs. I think in Freshers Week, that's I think Durham Uni got those cool Hope hats. So that's some of the kind of things that UCCF are doing. We have around 70 staff workers around the country working with more than 100 CUs. And ultimately, our vision is that every student in Great Britain will get the chance to hear and respond to the gospel of Jesus. So within UCCF, I'm responsible for something called the Science Network. I said we've got about 70 staff. The Science Network is currently just me, but very excitingly, Emma, who's here today, is going to be joining us as an intern for the Science Network in August. So I imagine probably most of us in the room, or most of us online, were at some point a Christian doing a science degree. Maybe you didn't actually do a science degree, maybe you weren't a Christian when you did it, but for lots of us that will have been true, which means you'll know that there are some really great things about being a Christian on a science degree, and there are some really tricky things at the same time about being a Christian on a science degree. So I thought, why don't we just turn in pairs if you're here in the room. If you're online and you're with someone, chat with them. If not, you might just have to think for yourself. And just think for a minute, what were some of the joys and challenges of being a Christian studying science? And then we'll feedback this back in just a moment. There. But I would love to hear from you. First, what were some of the... yeah, I'm going to start using that. What were some of the joys of being a Christian doing a science degree? Anyone want to share?
I enjoyed surprising people that I was a Christian on my course.
Yeah, that moment in lecture when you're like, by the way, guys, actually, I believe all that stuff. And you're like, what? That's crazy. Yeah, who else? Thanks.
When I started my science degree, I had been a Christian for 3 weeks. So it was all exciting.
Yeah, great. Okay, let's have one more joy and some challenges.
Yeah, I think people are just actually really curious, and you get more of a platform because of the kind of unique nature there. And I love that. I love that that curiosity is there, and I think a science degree more than most others, being a Christian.
Yeah, great. Okay, so what are some of the challenges of being a Christian studying science that you guys found?
So I was saying, I actually had a bit of both. I did part of a degree as a non-Christian, and then I was a Christian and
Okay.
finished off the degree. And yeah, I think sort of taking on some and taking in Christian values, particularly when you're interacting with peers. I think, how do I put this? There were certain things that I mourned that I wasn't able to do or engage in that I was able to before. And yeah, so there was obviously lots of good things, but I'd say, yeah, there were certain things I mourned a little bit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think I found more from like tutors and lecturers, more like stuff being said from the front that, yeah, kind of really dismissive of Christians, particularly kind of ethical questions, I think. And yeah, finding that, yeah, obviously challenging, but not really feeling in a position to be able to say anything because it was a person with authority. So yeah, not so much from peers, but from higher up.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember the first week of my third year, the head of my department said in our introductory lecture, we don't talk about God here. And, like, just totally shut that down as an opportunity for conversation. Yeah, one more challenge.
I think being in a science course with no other Christians and then being in a church where even if they were scientists, they didn't really make themselves known. I think the challenge was getting to practice those sorts of conversations. So immediately felt a bit more defensive talking to my non-Christian friends than I would have been if I had other Christians to talk to about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I can both feel like you're on your own in your course and you're on your own in your church. And that is a really hard place to be as a science student. So, yeah. So we can see Christian students in the sciences facing a whole load of challenges, but also loads of opportunities, which are really exciting. I'm sure most of us know from our own experience that university is such a formative time in life, isn't it? The ways of thinking you pick up at university stick with you for the rest of your life. The way you think about work at university is probably going to determine whether you think about your future career in science as just a way of paying the rent or as a really key part of God's calling on your life. Yeah, these make some really big differences the way you start thinking university. And university is also a huge open door for mission. We have this little catchphrase in UCCF, we often say that university is the last best opportunity to hear about Jesus. Until maybe the nursing home, except possibly if you go to prison, university is such a unique opportunity where you're living right alongside Christian and non-Christian students. You have all this free time. The students don't think they have free time, they do have free time to think about these things. And there's this huge openness to ideas as students leave family homes and go out into a new place where they can think for themselves. There is a huge open door for mission for students at university. Yeah, if you're a Christian at uni, think about how many chances you got in a week to speak about Jesus to a non-Christian friend when you're a student versus how many times you get that in a week now. I bet it was a whole load more when you're at university. So, university years are this huge opportunity for science students both to figure out how their studies fit into God's plan for the world and to figure out how they can use their science to talk to their mates about Jesus. So, that's why the Science Network exists. We're all about equipping students in the sciences to live and speak for Jesus in their time at university, but also beyond that. And we thought the best way to introduce you to some of the stuff that we do would be just to tell some stories from some students that I've encountered in the last year. Just share a bit about them and kind of the ways they've interacted with the Science Network, what we've done to support them. So, first up, let me introduce you to Cindy, who is not appearing. Oh, there she is. These are not actual photos of the students, but I tried to get stock photos that look very like them to not like breach GDPR or whatever. So, Cindy is a final year student at Teesside. I met her at Forum this year, which is our big student conference, like 1,000 CU leaders. We all get together in a field near Wales in August. And so Cindy's got a job lined up for next year in the field of artificial intelligence, which is super exciting. She was just feeling quite nervous about being a Christian going into that. She's got this church and this CU support as a student, but going out beyond her student days, she was just quite nervous about what's going to look like living out her faith there. So Cindy this year has been part of the first cohort of our mentoring programme called Sparked, where she's been given the foundations that she's going to need to go out confidently as a Christian into the working world of science. So through the year, we've gone through sessions on the competitive nature of a science career. We've talked about ethics. We're talking this term about sharing the gospel with colleagues. So really hoping that she's going to go out next year into that AI job, feeling really confident that she can be a Christian in that field, that she knows how to engage with some of the challenges that are going to face her. The second person I'd like you to meet is, it's not working that well, this clicker. Well, we will meet Joshua in a minute. Here's Joshua. So Joshua is a student at Leicester doing physics, and he's in his first year. And I met him this year at Word Live. So we every year host a seminar stream at Word Live. This year we had Professor John Wyatt speaking about science and the future of humanity, which is really cool. We had about 150 both students and wider church come along each day at Word Live to think about artificial intelligence and bioethics and evolution, which is a really cool time. So Joshua came along to that seminar stream. I think he was really inspired that actually the things that his non-Christian mates care about, the gospel actually cares about too, that there are connections to be made there. So he's headed back to Leicester this term. He's just joining the CU committee. And he and I are chatting about what they could be doing to particularly reach science students in that CU. He's really keen to start having meetings with the science students where they get in professors or older Christians in science to talk to them and then start planning events for their non-Christian mates. So that's Joshua. The third person I want you to meet is Naomi. She'll appear in a minute. Naomi is a fresher studying biology, there we go, at Nottingham. I met Naomi through a book club that we ran last term. I don't know if you've come across Gavin Ortland's new book, Retrieving Augustine's Doctrine of Creation. I loved it. I would really recommend if you've not come across it. And Naomi, as she rocked up in this book club, we kind of were sharing our backgrounds, thinking about creation. And Naomi's church had basically taught her you couldn't be a Christian and believe in evolution. And so when she rocked up to start a biology degree and she found the evidence for evolution really compelling, she was really struggling and really confused. So we worked through this book together across the term. And by the end of term, I'm not totally sure what she believes about creation at the minute, but she'd seen that there were options open to her that she didn't know were possible. That it was possible both to be a Christian and believe in evolution, if that's where her convictions ended up, but also that she could have deep unity and fellowship with Christians who disagreed. We had people in this book club who thought all sorts of different things. We didn't all agree totally, but we were able to have a real unity in the gospel despite our disagreements. So that's just a snapshot of some of the kind of things we're doing with the Science Network to equip science students to live and speak for Jesus. And do come chat to me later if you are keen to help support some of these science students. You think, I've got something I'd love to write about, talk to a student about, or I could meet some students at a university I'm near. We totally rely on supporters and on contributors. So come chat if you'd like to get more involved. Another great way you guys can connect up with us is on Instagram at UCCF Science Network, and we have a snazzy new website for this year, sciencenetwork.uk. We spent a long time trying to find a good handle for that, but we eventually found one. So that's a bit of an overview of what the Science Network is all about. But I was thinking, we're talking today about science, faith and public engagement. What can I share from what we do as UCCF that might be helpful to you guys in the places that you're engaging publicly, you might be able to take away? And what I wanted to do was just share a little bit of the training we do with evangelistic speakers. CUs up and down the country put on events where they get a speaker in to come and give a gospel talk, kind of on a theme. And we do some training for speakers who come and do those. And I've done some of that specifically for the Science Network, thinking about how do we take these conversations about science and faith and lead them to the gospel. So I thought it would just be quite fun to talk through some of this training that I do with speakers and then have a little bit of time to apply that specifically to some science questions. So this is not a material that's original to me, I should say now. I have borrowed it from other people who have put much more time into this than me. So I played a little bit with the title of the conference and called this Science, Faith and Persuasive Evangelism, because it kind of sounds the same, doesn't it? But yeah, okay. So the framework we're going to talk through is based on an episode in the book of Acts, where Paul encounters this group of Gentile philosophers who he goes to preach the gospel to. And to begin with, they just have no idea what he's talking about whatsoever. They're super confused. So we're going to be in the second half of Acts 17. Feel free to get up in the Bible on your phone, but you don't need to. I'll put relevant stuff up here. So we're going to take a look at Paul's masterclass in public engagement. So, Acts 17, we find Paul in Athens. He's just run off from some trouble that's going on in Berea, and he's waiting for Silas and Timothy, his travelling companions, to catch up with him. And what are you going to do? If you're the Apostle Paul, you've got some time to kill in a new city. Obviously, you're going to go to the marketplace and start preaching about Jesus. That's just what Paul would do. So Paul does that, starts talking about the resurrection, but it just seems like his usual tactics don't stick in Athens. This is how the episode begins. So a group of Epicurean and Stoic philosophers began to debate with him. Some of them asked, "What is this babbler trying to say?" Others remarked, "He seems to be advocating foreign gods." They said this because Paul was preaching the good news about Jesus and the resurrection. Then they took him and brought him to a meeting at the Areopagus, where they said to him, "May we know what this new teaching is that you're presenting? You're bringing some strange ideas to our ears, and we'd like to know what they mean." So to these Greek philosophers, Paul's preaching about the resurrection, it sounds like nonsense. It's totally new to them. They're not Jewish. They have no concept of a Messiah or a resurrection. But precisely because it's so unfamiliar and it's so strange, they're actually quite interested. And I was thinking that in many ways sounds quite a lot like our culture today, doesn't it? I'm not old enough to remember this, but even 50 years ago, Christianity was much more part of the DNA of British society. People would have grown up in Sunday school, kind of known the Bible stories in a way that the student generation of today don't. They just don't have that kind of Christian heritage. They know far less about Jesus. Loads of international students who are coming to study here might not even have heard of Jesus before. But that also means they're potentially way more interested than the students of a generation ago, because they just don't really know anything about the gospel. They're quite intrigued to know more about it. So, we're going to follow to see how Paul seeks to win these Greek philosophers over. And we're going to draw out 3 principles that I think we can use in our public engagement. So 3 principles are going to be identify, persuade, invite. I know this will be familiar to anyone who's been to a Christian Persuaders conference, which I know Ruth has, but it might be new to others. So we're going to unpack some of those principles. First up, identify. What does Paul do first when he's faced with people who just don't get what he's talking about? He wants to identify with his audience. He steps into their world, explores their beliefs, connects with the things that they really value. So this is how Paul starts. "People of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious. For as I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship, I even found an altar with this inscription, 'To an unknown God.' So you are ignorant of the very thing you worship. And this is what I'm going to proclaim to you." So Paul is showing these Greek philosophers here that he gets them. As he's walked around the city, he's observed everything that's going on, and he sees what they believe. He sees their desire to worship expressed in all of these statues, but he also sees this kind of general confusion about exactly what should be worshipped, shown by this statue to an unknown God. And so he can then connect from this, their own stuff, their objects of worship, to the gospel. And that's so winning, isn't it? He's showing that he's on their turf. He actually cares about what they believe, what they care about. And later we even see him quoting the Athenian poets to make his points. He's showing that he really does dwell in their environment. He knows them. And we really need to be able to do the same in our own evangelism, I think, in our own engagement. If we want people to listen to us, we need to show that we're listening to them. It needs to be clear that we genuinely understand their worldview and we get people's objections to the gospel before we then try and answer those objections. So here's a challenge for you guys. Do you guys know what your peers who are in science believe about the world? If they don't believe in God, do you know why? If they do believe in some kind of higher power, do you know what they think about that higher power? How do they feel about Christianity in general? If we're going to be able to meaningfully address people's objections to the gospel, particularly scientists' objections to the gospel, we really need to know what they're thinking. And the only way to know that is to listen. There are a couple of ways I think we can be listening. The first obvious way is just to ask people. It's been really encouraging seeing the kind of research that's going on, asking people, how do scientists think about, how do church leaders as well think about science and faith? But we can do that with our own just friends, can't we? Friends, colleagues. Find out from them, like, what do they believe about Jesus? Why are they, hostile to the gospel? But the other way we can be listening is by listening to culture. There is so much around us in culture which is just telling us loads about the deeper beliefs and values of society. I find out even watching David Attenborough, there is so much going on under the surface about the deeper values of our culture. So it's really worth watching and reading and listening widely, picking up on what society believes and values. And we do that with subcultures too. Reading New Scientist, watching science documentaries, really helpful for picking up what is it that scientists really believe about the world. So we listen, we demonstrate that we've been listening in a conversation or in a talk we might be giving. And whenever we find something that is right and true in the worldview of people around us, we can really affirm that. So when it comes to science, if your scientist mates believe truth exists and that science is trying to find it, or they believe that human beings have value, or that the environment is worth protecting, or that science should have some kind of moral code governing it, we can go really hard on affirming those things. Those are true and right things. Of course, as we listen, we will also find lots in other people's worldviews, which is not right or not true. Which brings us on to the second point of engagement from Paul's sermon, which is persuade. We might feel like persuasion is a bit of a dirty word when it comes to evangelism. Shouldn't we just tell people the gospel clearly rather than try and coerce them onto our side? But we don't need to be afraid of being persuasive. Paul does it all the time through the New Testament. Persuasive evangelism doesn't just tell people what to believe, it persuades them that actually it is worth changing their mind to believe the gospel. So we see Paul doing this here. He says, "The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth, and does not live in temples built by human hands. And he's not served by human hands as if he needed anything. Rather, he himself gives everyone life and breath and everything else. As some of your own poets have said, we are his offspring." So Paul's pointing out the inconsistency of the Athenian religion. They're obsessed with all their temples and their statues, but at the same time, they seem to believe that they're God's offspring. How can it be true that these statues are God's, but also they're God's offspring? So Paul shows that the Athenians' religion is inconsistent and irrational, and he offers them something better, the true God who is Lord of heaven and earth. You might well know this quote. Blaise Pascal famously wrote that we should so speak of religion so that people will wish it were true, and then we show that it is. Speak of religion so people will wish it were true, and then show that it is. Now, if we want our colleagues in science to think it is worth changing their minds to believe the gospel, they need to be convinced that the gospel is both good and true. I think more and more so in a kind of post-truth society, they need to be convinced that it's livable, that a life based around Jesus actually works in practice. That's so often, I think, how people make their life decisions now. Not so much, do I think this is true, but does it work in practice? And the flip side then is that they also need to see that the alternative that they're currently believing is less good, not actually true, and doesn't work as well in practice. And there are so many avenues, aren't there, when it comes to science and faith issues that we can go down to persuade people that the gospel really is good and true for science. Maybe you're chatting to a scientist who really values reason, and you want to persuade them of the truth of the gospel by going down the intellectual argument and logic kind of route. You guys will know loads of different intellectual reasons why it's a really good thing for scientists to believe in God. Take, for example, the remarkable fact that anything exists at all, let alone the logical, finely tuned, deeply ordered universe that we live in. Or you can talk about the historical reliability of the Bible and all this evidence of the resurrection we know is there. Or maybe you don't just want to appeal to their head, you want to appeal to their hearts as well. show how the sense of awe and wonder that you feel as a scientist at the created world can point them to the even more awe-inspiring creator of everything. Or maybe you want to really show them the gospel is livable for a scientist. And on that, like, we are our own most persuasive arguments, I think, just to show that, hey, I do science, I studied science, and I'm a Christian, is so persuasive. Or, like Bob did earlier, walking through that rich Christian legacy that science has to show, look, it is a really good thing to be a Christian and be a scientist. It really works. So when it comes to trying to persuade scientists, the gospel is good, it's true, it's livable, we have so much on our side. And I think sometimes, as we talk about science and faith issues, we have this tendency to be a little bit on the back foot, be a little bit defensive, always kind of wanting to respond to challenges that come at us from the culture, saying that science and faith are in conflict. And it's true, we really do need to respond to those challenges. But I'd really love to see Christians setting the agenda a bit more some of the time, deciding what are the things we want to talk about. What are all of these ways that science can point to the gospel? And not be ashamed of putting those out there. So lastly, we've come to the last of our 3 steps, invite. The gospel calls for a response, doesn't it? It's all very well if our hearers, when we're chatting to someone who's a scientist or we're giving a talk, if our hearers think our points are interesting, that's great, but it's not going to move them to change in any way. And we've got to let people know there is something on offer that requires a response from them. So Paul does this as he closes his speech in Athens. He says, in the past, God overlooked such ignorance, but now he commands all people everywhere to repent. For he's set a day when he will judge the world with justice by the man he's appointed. He's given proof of this to everyone by raising him from the dead. So Paul's letting his hearers know that a response is required. God is calling them to repent. They can't just walk away and be like, oh yeah, cool, Paul, that was kind of interesting, but I'm not going to do anything. Paul's communicating a certain urgency about doing something, about believing something in response to what they've heard. Now, not every conversation we have or talk we give is going to end in, right, you need to repent. That will be a bit like crazy intense. But we always do want to make sure we're offering a next step for people that we're engaging with. How do they not just go away and forget about everything they've heard? They keep engaging. Maybe it's just saying, hey, we could chat more another time with a personal friend. Maybe it's offering something they could listen to or watch or read next to keep exploring. Maybe it is at the right time offering, actually, what's really on offer here is relationship with Jesus. Do you think you might want that? Whatever kind of point people are at that we're engaging with, we want to make sure we are giving them the next step they can keep thinking these things through. So, to summarise Paul's masterclass on public engagement, as we seek to share the gospel, we want to be identifying with the audience we're speaking to, attempting to persuade them that the gospel is good, it's true, and it's livable, and inviting them to know this God that we're talking about for themselves. So, it's after lunch, you've all heard me talk for a while, and I'm bored of my own voice. But the rest of our time, we're going to spend putting this into practice for ourselves. So, I'm going to move it so you all see this. I've come up with some questions that I think would be interesting things, either to give a talk on, maybe in a student setting, maybe in a different setting, or you might just come up in an interesting conversation with a non-Christian mate. You can read them for yourself. And I want you guys, with a person next to you, to imagine that either you've been invited to your local university to give an evangelistic talk, as this title, or if that's a bit out of your comfort zone, you're just having a conversation with a mate, and this is kind of what it's got on to. And just chat, how would you identify with your audience on this topic? What do you think the people you're speaking to already believe about this, and how can you show that you get them, you get their world? Second, how can you persuade them that the gospel has something good and true to offer when it comes to this question? And lastly, what next step might you offer so that they can consider Jesus further? What are you going to invite them to? So we've got maybe 10 minutes. I don't know what time we need to definitely stop because we started late. But turn with the person next to you and just have a little chat about that. there. Um, thanks for all of your hard thinking and discussion. We don't have ages to hear back, but it'd be great to hear back from one group about, that makes it quite high pressure, doesn't it, sorry, to be the one group that volunteers. So maybe I'll just pick on you. About what you discussed. Anyone particularly keen to share your little outline that you came up with? Otherwise, I'm going to pick you guys at the front. I heard you get to the invite bit.
I smiled at you. I shouldn't have.
Cool. Which question did you pick?
The first one. Didn't get further than the first one. So we chatted about if science is a solution to all humanity's problems. We thought a great way to identify with our audience is that, so we completely understand, we wish that it was sometimes, because you have a problem which is close to your heart and you kind of want to do something tangible as a human to be able to make things better. So there's almost that desire there that science could be the solution, because then we can fix things. So I think we can identify with the fact that this problem is causing them suffering and they want things to be different. I think, sorry, I'm going to keep going, but shouting. We also then said that, so some problems might have some aspects to them which science can help with, but actually if you ask them what problems are on their minds, often there's a human heart issue that's behind it. And so when we then link it to the gospel, we can actually say that we needed God to come into this world because of the heart issue, and actually all the problems that are hurting you are a heart issue. And so science has something to say, but actually science doesn't have anything to say about the fact that you want things to be better, or that you have a particular value that you wish the world would be a better place. And so that's different side of things is where the gospel has something really strong to say about those problems that are causing you trouble. And I think that kind of leads on a bit to the Jesus one, because that's the reason he came, is our heart issue, and we can't quite get around it without him.
Yeah, amazing. What would be your next step then? If they're going away from your talk, your conversation, what are you going to give them to do next?
Well, since I work at the Faraday, it'd be quite nice to know what problems are on their mind, and it's quite nice to then link them to Christians who find that that problem is their passion as well, and that's their field. And then you can point them to someone who's done a lot more thinking on maybe one particular problem.
Well, just basically, depending on the issue, and I mean, all of humanity's problems is obviously a very broad question. But in a conversation, you would find more tangible examples of what kinds of things they were thinking of. I think what specific things they focus on will also lead to how you approach that final step, because sometimes it might be actually, can you meeting somebody and having a conversation. Sometimes it's actually, something very practical where that, you could maybe lead them to a book or an article or something like that. If there's something quite easy is the wrong word, but something quite, standard that you can kind of lead them to. And some people respond better to that than
some
so
people will not want me to give them a book. So others are. Great. I said we were going to hear from one group, but that was so great. I kind of want to hear from another group. And does anyone do a different question? Sarah, I keep making eye contact with you, so please, I'm going to pick on you.
We kind of between us chatted about two different questions, but we sort of came towards a similar conclusion, really. So we looked at the second and third question. So hasn't science made God redundant? And are humans more than just biological machines? So identifying that we talked, with the second question about science making God redundant, I guess kind of showing like an appreciation for the amazing kind of advancements and discoveries of science and all the kind of great things that it can do. And kind of how well the human body works and that kind of thing. So I suppose, identifying in that way. But then I think I was saying I don't naturally go for the like persuasion thing. I think I'd more go towards the looking at the limitations of science and therefore, which I guess you can get towards a bit of a like God in the gaps thing then, can't you? So like trying to stray away from that, but yeah, I guess showing where maybe science can't solve all our problems or answer all our questions, and therefore God isn't redundant in that. And actually, where we end up in those kind of perhaps hopeless situations where it could seem like we're just robots and biological machines, actually there's so much more to life than that, and therefore having an invitation at the end. Do you want to add anything, Devinda?
I think the only thing would be I think we agreed, didn't we, that no one lives a life that's consistent with answering truly to those questions that in a way that eliminates God. So we don't live as though we're just biological machines. No one does, even if they thought they were. You don't just sit in a corner and wait to die. You don't. And whether science has made God redundant, we don't live lives, even people who study science very closely. I mean, even your most sort of staunch atheists don't then have any other values besides, well, let's just elevate and put science forward.
Yeah, they don't plan their love lives based purely on science, do they? So, yeah, it's a really persuasive point, being like both taking out their worldview, being like, it's not consistent, is it? You actually live like what you say you believe, and then offering something better. Yeah, amazing, cool. We'll stop there. I hope that exercise has been like, in some ways helpful as you think about your own engagement on some of these topics. You also now, I don't know if you guys would speak at student things ever anyway. If you don't, you've just planned an evangelistic talk that you could use at student events. Say, do get in touch with your local Christian union or with me. Like, let them know, hey, I've got this thing that I could do for you now if you want. But yeah, just to remind you again, connect with us on Instagram, do find us on the website, and that's my email if you want to get in touch about anything. But yeah, that is it for me.
Great, thank you so much, Emma. I think we need to say a particular thank you to Emma, who is it your 2-week wedding anniversary today? Is that right?
Yeah, it's about 2.5 weeks.
2.5 weeks. So we're particularly grateful for her to take the time today to join us. There's a couple of things I want to say before we go to our next break. And that is, we haven't mentioned it yet, but we really want some feedback from you today. And there's a couple of ways you can do that. The first one is, if you're in the room, we've got paper copies which you can complete and hand back to us, please. And then we've also got a QR code which you can scan to complete. It's the same set of questions. And then I think Matt is also going to put in the chat on the Zoom the same feedback form for you to complete. We're going to leave this up for a little while. It will probably pop up again at the end, but we had a particularly high return rate of feedback forms last time at our last conference, and it was really, really helpful for us. So if as many people as possible can complete it, that would be really helpful for us. And if you do it now, then you won't get nagging emails from me asking for feedback in like 2 weeks' time. So yeah, that would be really helpful for us. It's as tick box as possible as well, because I hate filling out forms. So we're going to take another break. We'll come back as close to 3:45 as possible. And we will be back for our last session then.